Doomsday. It's such a terrible title. It sounds like something a cartoon villain would say. Now I will bring Doomsday upon the earth. Wah! It sounds really rubbish. The Parting of the Ways worked quite well as a title, quite simple and elegant, but this is more simple and about 1,000,000 times less elegant. Utter rubbish. Anyway, I have to admit that if it wasn't for my ongoing look at the Daleks, I cannot imagine any reason why I'd want to review this story. It's just not what I'm interested in when it comes to Doctor Who. It's an event story, one to mark a significant moment and be huge, without considering how to tell a good story while it does it. Meanwhile, the character stuff devolves into quite laughable melodrama without looking in any detail at the human aspects behind any of it. I'm not even sure I'd call the story bad. I mean, it's not good either, but you'll do a lot worse than New Who. See both of the episodes that precede this story, but it's just kind of an amalgamation of many of New Who's most tiresome tropes for me personally. If it wasn't for the Daleks, I can't see myself having any interest in looking at this. And there is the irony, because for the first time since Frontier in Space, this is not a Dalek story. It is merely a story the Daleks are in. And they are indeed in it, as are approximately 12,000 other plot threads, of which they are merely one. It's not what I personally would call a Dalek story. Now, when I started this Dalek look a long time ago, I set the criteria as a story based around the Daleks, one in which they weren't just on a roll call of cameoing villains, and ones where they are the main driving force behind the plot, and frankly, this story doesn't fulfill any of those criteria. It's certainly not based around them. They're sharing the spotlight with another major villain, and they're really just a secondary plot rather than the main one. So, honestly, I could, on that basis, get away with just skipping it entirely, but I won't for two main reasons. One, this is a kind of essential viewing for the next Dalek story, which definitely is a Dalek story, and as much as I would love to skip that one because it's fucking awful, that however kind of has to be done, so this one kind of has to be done too. And secondly, it is still regarded overall as a Dalek story despite that. At least it's always been my impression of fandom's view on it. So we'll call it an honorary Dalek story and go from there. But this is the least Dalek-y Dalek story I'll cover in this look, as they're in it for like a third of it, maybe a tad more but not much. It should of course be pointed out that the other main villain prominent in this story is the Cybermen, who I have consciously decided to avoid reviewing before now. The only other story with them in I have looked at is the Five Doctors, and they're just a cameo in that. It's not a story I would have included in any look at the Cybermen on the same criteria as the Daleks, and yes, such a look is on the cards when I reach the end of the Dalek stories. Amusingly, when I started, I name-dropped Eve of the Daleks as the last Dalek story at that point, but with the admission there may well be more while I'm in the process of doing it. Now we're 4 years later, Jesus, and at the moment, the last Dalek story currently stands as Eve of the Daleks. Factoid presented without comment. Anyway, yeah, I think looking at the Cybermen is a distinct possibility once I've got through the rest of New Who's Dalek stories, but frankly I'm not too worried I'm doing this one now, because honestly this isn't really that much of a Cyberman story any more than it is a Dalek one. It's a bit more, they're in it a bit more, and we get more of a sense the plot revolves around their actions, but honestly not by much. It feels like, well, they've been added because they're another plot point to use as an event. Just one of the more of the several million different plot points this story has. And that belies the approach. This is more of an event than a story. One where this is meant to be a momentous occasion rather than an actual story, and therefore the Daleks and the Cybermen are meant to just complement this by making it feel big. Just big. And to be fair, it does feel big. It just frequently comes at the expense of minor things such as telling a good story or making a lick of fucking sense. While this is hardly a novelty among New Who, it is arguably the first time it happened, at least to this scale, and is therefore patient zero for a lot I hate about New Who. It's very much spectacle, event-driven storytelling rather than using the characters, plots or themes. It's fast-paced to the point of irritation, never letting the story breathe and skipping over major plot threads to get to the next explosion or explosion equivalent. And its character drama is emotionally manipulative melodrama. All it's missing is a browser history joke to be the Doctor Who review guide's kryptonite, so a long line of annoyance maybe starts here, and that is my main criticism. The structure itself, not that it leads to later irritating things. I should clarify that. To be honest, most of my other criticisms are pretty minor, and this is not a bad story, as I said, merely just a lackluster and uninteresting one. Which brings us back to how I started. I wouldn't be reviewing this if not for the Daleks, because it's just not a story that interests me. Other than me getting cross at the stuff I mentioned, and even that only goes so far. So, here we have a story where stuff happens, most of it not very interesting. I sound as excited as I am. So we'll get going on the story proper then, starting with production as always, because it's usually a short bit to get out of the way. I mean, it naturally comes before when looking at it in a logical way. Anyway, the director of the story was Graeme Harper, who this series became the first and only director to work on both Classic and New Who. I highly doubt there are any other Classic directors who are going to return to the series at this point, especially as it's just been cancelled. Anyway, Harper is also someone I've sung the praises of many times, and it won't be different today as he does an excellent job, but it's probably fair to say this is not an enormously visual story, or isn't just exposition, is usually just generic action, at least in my view, so there isn't too much the director could have done here, but Harper nevertheless keeps things tight and dynamic as he always does, never letting things slow down and equally never letting it run away with him, always keeping a tight focus. To use a few examples, when the Cybermen are attacking the humans, or rather just menacingly standing there, but we'll get to that in a moment, he uses slow-down camera angles to make them feel hugely imposing. Yet when they're fighting the Daleks and becoming rather less powerful, they're more frequently filmed straight on, from above or on a wide shot, to diminish them against a stronger foe. Clever but simple as well, no fancy over-the-top stuff. Another example, the final scene with the Doctor and Rose, is one where he comes out with the most credit, focusing on out of anyone involved in that scene, focusing on a definitely Norway and not South Wales landscape when he wants it to feel more distant and hopeless, but keeping it nice and tight with the personal interactions. I also think he does an excellent job with the scene where the Doctor and Rose get separated, but I'll speak about this more a lot later on, so... There are moments where it feels a lot less effective, admittedly, but almost all of these are ones where the script gave him no choice. In the end, the director can only work with the words he had on the page he has, and I'm sure the script didn't give him the option of the Cybermen doing something else other than just, standing there. One thing he does do that is a bit baffling is adding a really silly scream to the Daleks that get dragged into the void, which honestly just kind of gets something funny of how ridiculous it is. I don't know if that was the director or the editor or the sound editor who made that decision, but whoever it was, it widely overestimated how effective it would be. But yeah, on the whole, this is certainly up to Harper's usual standard. Other parts of the production are less notable, and the special effects are mostly poor, quite laughably so at times, to be honest. But I won't be boring and harp on early new CGI. It's such low-hanging fruit that it kind of just feels lazy on my part, so I'll say it's bad and leave it there. Although admittedly it's quite funny in the first episode how we're repeatedly told how uncomfortable the sphere is making everyone, and it only ends up to just show not tell because the dodgy CGI does very much have an uncanny valley feel to it. Anyway, now I'll leave that there. As for anything else, well, Murray Gold definitely did the soundtrack for this, and I'll leave that there. Anyway, the script, which I say is the interesting part, but it's probably giving it more credit than it deserves. Naturally, as a series closer, Russell himself took this one on, and therein perhaps lies the issues, but I digress. The primary problem, as I said, is it feels like it's just a series of plots and events, added to make it feel big, without thought to how they might all come together, which they don't, because there's too many of them anyway, and even if they weren't, only the most basic of attempts are made. I'll say that some of them do work in terms of plot progression, A causing B, which leads to C. That's not always the problem. The problem is how many of them there are, how unimportant some of them feel, how little character or thematic links there are, basically everything except the pure plot link. That's what makes it feel just like a connection of events. For instance, the ghosts that give the first episode of this flipping thing its name, the only real link it has to anything else that happens, it turns out they're the Cybermen, which is not explored any further once the Cybermen or once the ghosts are gone. In fact, I don't think there's a point in the entire second episode where the ghosts get mentioned at all. It just feels like it's been thrown in to provide a hook in that first episode and then nothing else, which I have to say irks me because it's way too huge of an idea for that, or at least it is in my eyes. Admittedly, it's not the most original one anyone has ever had, but ghosts overrunning the world, what that means for the people who are suddenly imagining their loved ones back, how much of it is just people seeing what they want to see, how does society react to this? And the thing, none of these things are things I've made up. They're all things the story itself touches on, and oh so briefly. They would be very interesting to explore, but they basically just get like one line of dialogue each, and then the story moves on to the next thing. It feels like a waste of an opportunity perhaps, but also time. If this plot isn't vital to the story you want to tell, and it isn't, frankly it should have been excised. Perhaps it could have been fitted properly with more interesting looking at human nature and how it's portrayed through the reactions of the ghosts, but otherwise it's just dead air, which is unfortunate because I have to say I like the idea, and I think it could have been a really effective mystery two-parter if it was allowed to stand on its own. As it is, it's just on the sheet of big event stuff, and well, it's a cool visual. It might have been rather more effective with the two big twists surrounding it, but it's not just some natural phenomena, it's all scientific, and being sort of controlled by a big scary organisation, and the Cybermen are behind it, hadn't been revealed within the first 10 minutes, but again, it's just that feeling that this is just here as a minor plot hook to lead on to completely different things, just to grab the attention rather than to be a plot by itself. And we come back to the main point, just to grab the attention is just another form of doing something for the spectacle. Sounds harsh, but there it is. So the entire title plot of the first episode is basically a 10-minute distraction, not starting off brilliantly. Okay, so after that we move on to Torchwood. I'm going to be charitable and suggest this plot has a purpose other than just set up for their shitty juvenile spin-off, but Yeah, let's be honest, that was probably it. Anyway, there's another instance where it kind of does work in a plot sense fairly logically. Doctor investigates ghosts, gets the attention of a shadow organisation with a big stake in it all, who then provide much of the setting behind the rest of the story. This progresses quite naturally, but the problem is yet again that basically nothing is done with it. I mean, okay, a bit more. Torchwood remains the setting for most of the rest of the story, but no more than the setting. It's not about being there. It's only really one step short of them just being there because they have the sets. Aside from the MacGuffins that are present there, and Yvonne doing the I did my duty stuff, which we'll get to momentarily, Torture as an institution is basically another thing you can remove from the second episode and nothing would change. And once again, there's a lot of potential here. The idea of this dark undercover organisation stealing alien technology, one that's ardently nationalist and immorally so, the dark underside of the nation state desperate to use whatever illicit means to return to Britain's former imperial glory. Well, you get one scene and about 4 lines in that scene if you'd be interested in exploring that, before it immediately leads into, you guessed it, another plot entirely, with that basically forgotten. It doesn't help that the portrayal of Torture doesn't fit that, going for more of a pally office vibe, which feels like maybe it's a bit of a tonal mismatch with the actual fact of them being fascist murderers. I mean, maybe it's trying to highlight the contrast, but there we just come back to the main problem, that this isn't given enough time to get that across. Again, it's one scene with 4 lines and then it's forgotten, so it does end up feeling like a tonal whiplash to go from ha office banter between these two who want to hump each other to, oh yes, we murder aliens to steal their technology to revive the British Empire. I know, tonal mismatches in New Who perish to fall, and even by this point it was hardly new, but it just sells completely short of the idea and makes it feel tacked on. Basically have a plot in this, really. Oh, I should talk about Yvonne, who's the only tortured character in this to get any personality, using that word very loosely, of course. She is the hyper boss, the pleasant enough but obviously ruthlessly efficient, and I like this in theory, especially combined with her blasé attitude towards the rather not nice things she and her organisation are doing. How much of this is any depth in the script, and how much of it is Tracy Ann Opperman's performance, we'll leave that up to you, but I think I know which it is. But again, it just doesn't go far enough. We don't explore her character really in terms of her views on her work, whether she's a true believer or feels any guilt towards it. Her final cry of I did my duty for Queen and country as she's technically cyber-converted, well, it's not hard to see it as just a slogan, a catchphrase really, rather than anything deeper. Is it a firm stance that she did what she thought was right and still truly believes that, even as she faces the consequences? And it's only the nastiness of said consequences that's troubling her? Or is it just telling it to herself, desperately trying to convince herself and failing badly? Well, your guess is as good as mine, because for that to be effective, there needs to be set up in her prior character journey, and we just didn't really get it. It's too generic. Still, she's an interesting enough character, I suppose, so we'll take it in this story. So anyway, Torchwood gets invaded, and it turns out the ghosts were the Cybermen the whole time. Naturally. I'll quickly talk about the Cybermen on the basis that when I do get around to covering their stories, this iteration of them will more naturally fit into their 2-parter earlier in this series anyway, as here they're just another element thrusted into the story and all will just be there. Now, to the story's credit, they do have a few Cyberman-y bits, especially in the first episode. The conversions, both part and full, are obviously the bread and butter of the Cyberman stories, and while the stuff with not Martha and the other workers is a bit old hat by this point, it's creepy enough, and the bit where the Doctor pulls out part of their brain is something I'm very surprised they got away with, but it's a wonderfully macabre bit that is always good to have when the Cybermen are involved. However, their plan is both quite convoluted. We disappear in the parallel universe and cross into this one, but do shifting and stuff and then become ghosts here. And quite simplistically silly. Right, now we're here, what will we do? Just sort of stand around and be menacing, I suppose. Those Cybermen standing outside the Taj Mahal, were they going to do anything, or are they just going to stand there? And yes, once again, they are another plot thread that gets introduced just to be there on the screen. And they're not really do anything, because once the Daleks turn up, they're basically just the Daleks' cannon fodder and not much else. Other than some mostly baffling bits, such as the alliance with the humans that just sort of happens without much explanation. Did you miss a scene, Russell? And then the equally unexplained Cyber Yvonne, who has been turned into a Cyberman but still has her mind and cries oil. What? If someone can write out what the fuck that's about and send it to me on a postcard so I can have a clue, I'd be eternally grateful. I'm not really a huge fan of the Cybermen. While they are imposing, and that is something I like about them, ultimately I think the design just makes them look too much like robots in a suit of armour. The human hands and the obviously recycled pipes and the wetsuits and the boots sprayed silver from the classic series. Yeah, sometimes maybe it looked a bit silly, but it did play into the concept that there was a person in there, not that far down. That this was something just added on top of the human being, and I don't really get it with these Cybermen. Still, this is very much a topic for another time. The only other Cyberman thing left to discuss is their long-awaited fight with the Daleks, which we'll get to when we look at the latter later in the review. So the Cybermen come from a parallel universe, right? Well, let's look at that, and this is again not badly crafted into the tapestry of the story overall. It's quite logical how the breaking down of the walls between universes that allowed the Cybermen to turn up allows us to meet the parallel world people as well. Once Mickey is there, it's obvious we'll get to see Pete as well, and I'm always up for more Pete. He's a great character, and Sean Dingwall gives a great performance as always. And it's a very natural setup for us getting to the end of the stage of the stories, which, yeah, that's all fine. The problem is actually more in the plot itself, in that we're told all of the backstory through exposition, rather than, oh, by the way, here's some crucial information you need to know exposition, which gets quite tedious fast. And it all gets brought up only for nothing to ever really come of it. Everything just sort of neatly resolves itself in the main plot, which is great, but it added nothing really in terms of stakes, given the whole Daleks and Cybermen thing already adding enough of that, I thought. And yeah, don't worry about the ending of your world that can easily be fixed by the plot MacGuffins. Yeah, that's not really all that watertight, is it? Speaking of which, the plot MacGuffins. It's turning out to be extremely convenient that everything in the void has magic magnet particles that present an easy way for everything to be fixed, topped off by technobabble exposition to make the audience understand why this quick fix is being implemented. Yes, Russell wrote himself into a corner with his massive invasion force, but it still feels extremely convenient, and I don't know, again, it's another of New Who's annoying tropes, the convenient ending. It's not as bad as the power of love being used to defeat the Master, or the power of tears being used to revive the Doctor, but it's extremely come on. It's like when you say defeat the boss and all the minion soldiers die. Like blowing up the droid ship in the Phantom Menace. It's not something you're going to get too mad at, but it's still a bit, well, that's lucky. If the villains didn't have that very specific and easy way to avoid weakness, the heroes would be completely fucked, and here we are. It also doesn't always make sense. For instance, the Cybermen are being dragged into the void, but that's not the problem entirely solved. The Cybermen have been converting people, and they're not going to be covered in void stuff. At least in theory they're not, so what are you going to do with those ones? Anyway, let's look at our heroes, given we just mentioned them. First of all, we'll look at the secondary heroes of the piece, Mickey, Jackie, and Pete. Mickey, I think, is the least important of the three by far. He sort of turns up, stands around looking concerned, making occasional snide comments, then has about 4 lines from the point he butterfingers and touches the Genesis arc to the end of the story. I like Mickey as a character, and it's nice to see him, ignoring what we learned subsequently about his actor, of course, but his arc came to its natural end in the Cyberman 2-parter earlier this series, and that fact means that there's nothing really else to add to it. Which brings us to Jackie and Pete, and this is very much where the former's arc comes to an end, and I think this is actually one of the story's biggest strengths. Jackie has been on the journey from total distrust of the Doctor and horror Rose has got herself into, to a grudging tolerance and respect and now acceptance of who he is and what Rose wants, but she never stops being herself, so she never has to like it, and I think her interactions with Rose, where she talks about how worried she is about the future she wants with the Doctor, how she's in touch with who she is, I think it works very well from Jackie's point of view, that she has tried to see this from her point of view and she has accepted the Doctor personally, but she won't ever stop worrying. And having her thrust into the situation by having to tag along with the Doctor allows her to see the lifestyle from her point of view, and that her reactions feel natural to that. But then later on is the point where she finally sees what Rose has seen, when she comes face to face with Pete again. The man she lost, the man she never moved on from, is now standing right in front of her. It's like in a moment she understands what the Doctor can do and why Rose has become so attached to it. He can produce miracles. And while the scene does go on a bit too long, things are a bit urgent, guys, what with the end of the world and all, it is absolutely a necessary one for Jackie to be faced with all she's ever wanted and for her to finally break down her walls in the face of it. And that's where her arc comes to its natural end. She's gone from the sceptical mother to someone who's seen firsthand what the Doctor can do for her. Codry is as wonderful as always, and I think Jackie is probably the strongest character in the piece. For Pete, the arc is obviously over fewer appearances and less time, but it does show his strengths. He's a natural leader, smart, quick thinking, and it's clear to see how he's been able to effectively lead his parallel Earth as a result, but he is a sensitive person, and we saw that both in his main world counterpart in Father's Day, and how his parallel universe version is too. And I think it's his very natural reactions for him to be constantly telling himself that this Jackie is different to his, and then cracking pretty much the moment he sees her, as they realise that even if they aren't quite the same, they're still the person they lost back in a way. I think it's a pretty effective character double character arc, and then sees 2 story on a high note. So now I can't put it off anymore, and let's talk about the Doctor and Rose. God help me. Look, I'm not a fan of this arc, and I'm not a fan of Rose in general, especially in Series 2. I think this is just kind of forced and fake feeling, that this idea of how much I'm supposed to get this relationship and how much it's meant to mean, it just doesn't work for a few reasons. Firstly, call me old-fashioned, call me the stereotypical nerd who hates the kissing in a TV movie and wants everything to be sexless, but I don't think there should be romance between the Doctor and his companions. And to prove I'm not those things, I'm fine with romance in other contexts in Doctor Who. The Doctor and recurring characters like River, for instance, that's completely fine. I'm fine with that, that can be very effective. And also between companions themselves, like Amy and Rory. I mean, it wasn't always executed well, but I was fine with the idea. And the classic series went way too far in making relationships that obviously were something seem completely dry. I mean, I have watched Nyssa and Tegan together. But I don't like it when there's a Doctor and companion because, I don't know, it's difficult to really explain. I think there's a power imbalance there that makes it seem off. It just makes it feel a bit wrong. It's difficult for me to really describe, but it's just something I don't feel ever works. And that New Who has plugged at it again and again and again. It just feels tiring because it's just never come close to working for me. In fact, one of the few good things RTD2 did was to jettison this and to give the Doctor a love interest of another kind. Not that that went anywhere, but it was an attempt. Yeah, I don't know, it's a bit tricky to explain, but I just don't like it. Secondly, it feels like RTD was trying to force this one, and it just never felt natural to me, even with that caveat in mind. I never got this from the Ninth Doctor and Rose, at least never in a convincing fashion, and I think basically having this be the default mode so soon after the 10th Doctor arrived made it feel so rushed. The template for this is always said to be the 8th Doctor's relationship with Charlie in Big Finish, and while I always thought that wasn't actually really romantic in any real way, the point is that even if it was, it was built up very slowly over several series of 2-hour-long audios, because Big Finish had the time and luxury to do that. New Who has 13 episodes a year, and an actress who didn't really have any wish to stay past this second series, and frankly who can blame her, she's already pretty much been typecast despite leaving when she did, is not something you want to do forever. So 13 episodes which all need actual plots and stuff happening in as well, where they can't just be entirely about this. It's just not enough time to build things up realistically, and so things aren't built up realistically. We're basically told to accept these two in a very romantic, close relationship, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I can see they're close, but I don't really see the rest of it, and yeah, I just think RTT was maybe trying to be too clever in making it subtle, or just didn't fly out, just didn't know how to approach it. Thirdly, RTD obviously completely fell for his own hype on this character and just took her least likeable qualities and took them into overdrive. She becomes overconfident and arrogant, unable to be told anything, completely convinced of her own brilliance, and it just becomes insufferable. This is of course similar to Queen Oswald, first of her name, nothing like as bad of course, but the principles are the same, which just show that this seems to be a recurring issue for New Who showrunners, becoming attached to their characters to the point where they just seem unwilling to do basic character things with them, such as giving them arcs that might occasionally paint them in a less than perfect light. It just makes it feel less relatable, less human, that the every girl that made the character work in Series 1 is just now entirely gone, and we just have a Doctor Who companion, as if she was created in a lab to be that, and it makes it feel like a distant, honestly quite flat character. All of this means that their relationship feels all the more forced and all the more less effective. So with all that in mind, how does it end? Well, I'm probably not going to shock anyone by saying I don't think this is particularly effective. Oh, I'm so happy, I hope this never ends, I hope dramatic irony doesn't come along and make me sad stuff at the start is so blatantly manipulative of the audience, it just comes across kind of pathetic rather than effective in any way. I also feel the build-up is kind of weak. The character stuff with Jackie is nice, but way too short to be effective before one of the 12 million other plots takes over, and it all gets shunted to the side, and I don't know, then it just feels like business as usual really, until we suddenly get the this is how we save the day exposition, and the back and forth between the Doctor and Rose essentially goes like, you need to go to the parallel universe. No, I want to be with you. Oh, alright. And that's essentially it, and the discussion over the vital decision here, Rose choosing to stay with the Doctor but meaning abandoning her mother forever, it goes back and forth in about 3 or 4 sentences, and that is a grave error. This needed to have been brought up much sooner. Structurally, this should have been entirely different. The scene should have been essentially split in two, with a long time for Rose to consider, for arguments with different characters to take place, and for this to be a serious character dilemma, one that tears her apart, rather than, bye mum, thanks for raising me. There was a dog version of me in the other universe, but that's probably dead now, but, close enough. Have fun! It just adds to several of the feelings I mentioned earlier that this feels rushed and shoehorned, and it just makes Rose just feel deeply unlikable. So anyway, they try and vote the Deus Ex Machina to save the day, and Rose gets dragged in, only to be saved by Pete. Somehow. To this day, I do not understand for a moment how he knew to do that. My only conclusion is that he read the script, because there's literally no other way he would have known to do that, other than that he decided to just go and check how things were getting on or something and was in the right place at the right time. Fuck only knows. Anyway, oh dear, she's trapped after all, never to see the Doctor again. And as much as it makes no logical sense how it happened, and how it's she didn't actually die trick that will be used for like every other companion departure for the rest of New Who, I think this would have been fine if it had ended here. That's it. They're up against the wall like that, and then the Doctor just walks away, and that's the end. We see a little more of Rose, but maybe like a minute or two, just to confirm she goes to live with her mother and not quite father, and that she will have to live in the parallel universe, and that's it. The end. Then, back in the TARDIS, Catherine Tate, end credits. That, I think, would have been way more effective than what we get. Such as just a sudden tragic end, the risk of travelling with a doctor coming to a head, that sometimes it can be dangerous, so it all comes crashing down in an instant. That's how life can be sometimes. One moment everything is fantastic, the next everything has fallen apart. And I think I will give credit where it's due. On its own, this scene is really effective. Just brilliant wordless performances from Tennant and Piper. So actually a really good tune from Murray Gold, and Harper blows it out of the water here with how well he does it. It's a really good scene, and this should have been the ending. But it's not. Instead, we get the final meeting, because all the ways the cross between universes have been closed, except this one convenient one we can use for dramatic purposes. And we get this stupid melodramatic ending, and yes, it's melodrama. The over-the-top crying, the love confession it isn't, it says it all in the over-the-top ridiculous words we already saw in just a minute or so immediately after the wall had sealed. Tennant, Piper, Harper and Gold conveyed all of that without a single line of dialogue, and here we are just saying it all, in a really basic and effective way. I love you. Ugh, it's just telling. When showing, you already had showed, and it was so much more effective. I just don't like the scene at all. It doesn't work. It's unnecessary, and the drama feels cheap and forced. Perhaps if the series and the story had done more to earn it, I'd like it more, but frankly, even then it would have felt tacked on. Again, you already had pretty much the perfect ending for this. I don't think any more should have been added. I think I would have liked the story a whole lot more if they had gone with that. Anyway, that's enough on that before I lose the will to live. Let's finally look at the reason we're bloody here in the first place for Daleks, because, as I said right at the start, this is not a Dalek story. They're just another plot point. They turn up to provide a cliffhanger, which, to be fair, is a very effective cliffhanger, except for the fact that at the time it was spoiled by both having the Black Dalek revealed to the public well in advance, and the fact you see the extermination effect in this story's next time trailer. But if you're watching the series completely new and you skip next time trailer, in theory it would be an excellent cliffhanger. Yeah. Anyway, they just play along as another plot, which just sort of leads into another plot and then goes nowhere. For instance, wow, the Cult of Skaro, Daleks with names that we've never seen out before, and they can think and act independently, who then act like any other Dalek we've ever seen before. They just act not differently at all. I mean, God knows the next Dalek two-parter is an absolute travesty, but I'll give it the credit that at least does something with that concept rather than nothing. I mean, nothing good, but at least it's not just they act like normal Daleks. And the Daleks posture a bit, talking Rose about the Emperor and the Doctor taunting him and all that, but you could cut out every single bit of that and just have them escort to the Genesis arc and nothing would change. And I don't just mean for the plot, I just mean for like the characters and the themes as well. It adds nothing other than just being there. It just feels like the most basic Dalek, them at the most simple level. They turn up and do Dalek things and that's about it really. There are two exceptions to this. Firstly, the Genesis arc, which just baffles me on so many levels. This thing is locked because it needs touch, which the Daleks can't do because they're inside their casings, which I have to admit would be an extremely convincing argument if we hadn't seen the Dalek open up its casing in the last series. Now, you might argue its tentacle doesn't count, but then how can it differentiate between hand and tentacle? If it could be so precise, why isn't it just key to open when Time Lords touch it, or even just one specific Time Lord, the jailer, so to speak? But of course, when Mickey touches it by accident, the Doctor defuses him of any blame by telling him, it's not really his fault, but Daleks will have just used the sun to open it. So the security measure is entirely useless. The Daleks are clearly not against finding some random star and using it to open this thing, so you might as well have just had a big red button on it saying, "Warning, big red button to open door. Don't use your sucker to push this or we'll be quite cross." It's just a very silly thing to add, that it just absolves Mickey of any blame, which you have to do. You can't have everything that happened be his fault. It just, I don't know, strikes me as lazy plotting. Oh, and then of course we find out what the Genesis arc is. A prison ship. Because clearly, in a destructive war of annihilation in which the entire of creation was at stake, the Time Lords would have found the need to take prisoners. Because they want to follow the Space Geneva Convention? This absurd idea is just glossed over like it's something obvious that we should happily accept. What possible reason would there be for the Time Lords to take Dalek prisoners? The reason warring opponents take prisoners of war is that if there's a set of rules as to how you should treat your opponent's disarmed and surrendering soldiers, your opponent will treat your disarmed and surrendering soldiers the same way, and that mutual understanding means that neither side will just start gunning down the other soldiers for sport. It's not a perfect system by any stretch of the imagination. World War II was not a fun war to be a POW in pretty much any circumstances, for instance, but that's the general principle. When one side would only ever take prisoners to use as temporary slaves as best before they kill them anyway, and that is the Dalek modus operandi, What possible reason would there be for the Time Lords to waste resources on Dalek prisoners? Again, this is a war for the entire of reality. Why would they construct this elaborate device and put millions of Daleks in it when the response from the Daleks is not going to be a mutual understanding to treat their Time Lord prisoners any better? Again, they'll just use them as slaves until they're not useful anymore and then exterminate them. It just makes absolutely no sense. It boggles the mind how RTD could not have done even the basic amount of research into this while thinking through the implications. The other thing the Daleks do is that is significant, and this is their conflict with the Cybermen. Now, this is a big moment, or should I say a big moment. Something the fans have wanted for years, the two most prominent villains going head to head, and yeah, it's a disappointment. For a start, it's yet another just additional plot that is one argument and a few small battles before the one big battle that we don't see much of, because that would have been expensive. So it goes nowhere and adds nothing. It just feels like it's been snuck in because it would be cool. And it would help that if it cool, and it would help that if it were cool, because it's just kind of sad as it is. I'm sorry, that initial verbal confrontation is just kind of ridiculous of how badly written it is. They're basically just two sides shaking their fist at one another, on the same level as kids playing and going, "Oh yeah, well my side is stronger than yours." It's just quite petulant, and some of the comments are quite terrible. "Oh, we killed, you'll destroy the Cybermen with 4 Daleks? No, we'll do it with 1 Dalek." That's not really a gotcha, the difference isn't that huge. And, well, let's be honest, for anyone who's seen the bitch fight of Canary Wharf, this scene is nigh on unwatchable because it just eviscerates it. I kind of feel sorry for Russell after watching that video. And, to be honest, the rest of the confrontation is a disappointment too. The way the Daleks just steamroll the Cybermen does the latter a disservice, and just comes across as kind of boring when you realise this is not really going to be the Daleks battle the Cybermen and more the Daleks defeat the Cybermen quite convincingly. And yeah, I want to make it clear, yes, in a one-on-one, the Dalek would beat the Cyberman. Nobody would question that. But this isn't a one-on-one. The Cybermen should use their massive advantage in numbers to do some serious damage. Their weapons are more powerful than bullet weapons, which can do damage to a Dalek if concentrated for long enough, so there's no reason why continued and sustained fire shouldn't make the Dalek sweat a bit. And remember, the Cybermen have a means of getting additional reinforcements very quickly. They're in control of much of Earth, so will have no problem doing so. Even with the Genesis arc, the numbers advantage is still theirs, and while they have the advantage of cool, calculated logic rather than Dalek's blind hatred and rage. I would have found it really interesting if the Cybermen had used, tactics, had been more tactical with it, and rather than the Daleks just open fire and exterminate thing. It would have made it a very interesting contrast. And despite all of that, yeah, the Daleks probably still win, but in a better story, this would be a proper fight, one where their advantages and disadvantages are clearly on display, because in the end, this is just another plot. One more thing that's been thrown in, and so there isn't the time to do anything other than CGI heavy fights where they just throw lasers at each other. And yes, in that scenario, the Daleks win. It's a sad waste of an opportunity, because too much was tried in order to make this an event. A big event, if you will. And the main event, the one that's really would have drawn the viewers in, is to see the Doctor's 2 most notable foes going head to head in the battle to the death. An Alien versus Predator style, whoever wins we lose situation. It gets drowned out on everything else going on. Frankly, it deserved this in its own story, but as it is, it's a disappointment. And that's the problem, it's not interested in telling any of its stories, this story. It's interested in having them and able to have all these events to show the spectacle, to be the story about all these things, but it's not interested in exploring any of them, and therefore most of them just feel lackluster. It's a shame because a lot of them had so much potential, but Russell just bit off more than he could chew here. Overall, I think it's far, far less than it could have been, and frankly some of these stories need to be jettisoned. The others may be spread over 3 parts instead of 2 to really properly use them. And let's be honest, we could have done without Love and Monsters, so there's a slot easily freed up. And as it is, it's just a collection of ideas and not much else. As for being patient zero for New Who's most annoying tropes, well yeah, unfortunately it does set up a lot of it here. Underdeveloped plots, more interesting spectacle than storytelling, weak characters twisted around what the showrunner wants his favourite characters to be, and melodrama instead of proper drama. Yeah, unfortunately much of it starts here, although much of it had been present before, of course, and while it is doubly a shame in that case, but that it starts so many of the reasons New Who is so much less than it could be. I don't dislike New Who, I want to make this clear. I'm really not I'm hating it just for the sake of hating it. It has some fine episodes and some fine ideas, and it has overall a positive contribution to Doctor Who's legacy, even I'll say that, but the biggest disappointment is it just could be so much more. It could have been so much more than it ended up being. Final score for the story is 5 out of 10, and it's pretty much bang average New Who in every respect. Some good ideas and moments, and it manages to stay fairly watchable throughout, but it just never finds what it wants to be. Never manages to give any of its many plots any meat, and the whole thing just feels like an exercise in existing and not much else. It's a shame because the potential was there, but it needed a radical rethink, and what ends up on the screen is just a disappointment in most respects. It's not terrible, it's watchable, it fills 90 minutes of television, but it's not more than that, and in that respect, it's very much a typical example of New Who.